Great. Here we are. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another session at Data Safeguard. Very interesting session today. And with me, our Chief Privacy Officer, Mr. Elliot Loyan.
Hi,
Welcome,
Dominic.
Elliot. It is always my pleasure to have you here. And it is not only my pleasure, to be honest, most of my friends, colleagues, industry leaders, they say, "Hey, when are you coming live with Elliot?" I say, "Very soon." They want to hear your insight, your wisdom. Okay, so today's topic we are going to talk about what is the necessity or why is the necessity of a chief privacy officer, CPO, in the age of enhanced global privacy regulations. In a world where data flows ceaselessly and privacy landscape evolve, the chief privacy officer emerges as the guardian of trust. As a global privacy regulation tighten their grip, the necessity of a CPO becomes undeniable. A vigilant steward navigating the delicate balance between innovation and individual privacy, shaping a future where data is not just a commodity but a responsibility. So let's hear more about the role and responsibility of a CPO brings in. I have a couple of questions here to ask about, and we want to hear your insight and wisdom. Can I proceed?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So let us know. I mean, what is a chief privacy officer and why he is relevant in this digital world?
It's a good question. I define the chief privacy officer as a senior executive who's responsible for overseeing a corporation's data privacy program. If I do a survey of the 1,000 largest companies, in many cases, the designee of chief privacy officer either reports to the CEO or is the CEO where no one has been nominated or appointed. I think the advent of the chief privacy officer is uh, that until 10 years ago, companies felt that their customer data was owned exclusively by them. That once the customer provided that data, ownership was uh, that of the company, and the company could pretty much do whatever they want with it. With GDPR, India's DPDP, several USA states' privacy rules, there's a fairly massive shift where corporations no longer own customer information. They don't own it exclusively and they don't own it partially. The ownership of that data remains with the individual.
Yeah.
And that's a huge cultural shift in responsibility and approach and perspective of companies. And quite frankly, companies are just getting used to it.
Yeah.
So the CPO, who's responsible for that shift, usually reports to the CEO, which means we're still grappling with how it needs to roll out in the organization. Right now, I would say the most important role of the CPO is for developing and implementing the policies associated to protect individuals' privacy and individuals' rights to their own data. They're also responsible for the cultural shift, which means training employees in privacy, reworking compliance and privacy compliance, and responding quickly and effectively to data breaches.
Great. Thank you. Why is a CPO important in today's data-driven world?
Yeah, and it is a data driven world, isn't it, Damodar?
Yeah.
You look at the world today, and corporations collect and process vast amount of information
Right.
on personal customers around the globe. Now, there's been uh, government and also corporate initiatives to keep individual data within the bounds of the country where it was collected,
Yeah.
but that's very much in its nascent period. You look at the data that's being collected, it includes everything from the normal personal identifiable information like names and addresses, financial information, and medical records, to even biometric information, face recognition, videos, voice recordings. Just amazing how the different multimedia has captured personal information that needs to be registered, needs to be monitored, and needs to be complied with.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what are some of the challenges that corporations face with respect to privacy compliance?
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that, it's easy to point your fingers at corporations and say they've
Mhm.
done a poor job of implementing safety precautions, protecting customer information from breaches. But the truth of the
Yeah.
matter is, it's a ever evolving regulatory landscape. And corporations, in many cases, are just trying to figure out what's applicable to them, what kind of shift in their data culture and business culture needs to take place, and how do you protect individual rights. You hear more and more CEOs talk about how this has become a huge problem, not only
Yeah.
in implementation, but also in trust of the customer for the corporation and its reputation.
Absolutely. Thank you. How can a chief privacy officer help corporations to comply with privacy law and regulations?
Well, corporations must comply, and the
Mhm.
fines, which can be a percentage of gross revenues, to fixed amounts which are material, um, they need to be moving in a positive direction. It's not something that's done overnight, and I think most regulatory agencies know that. The big concern, of course, is when there is a breach or when personal information gets exposed unintended um, through uh, nothing malicious, just the normal operations. These things can happen. And how do they protect? How do you protect information? And, there are tools out there. For example, Damodar, you and I both work on data redaction and data masking tools with Data
Yeah.
Safeguard. And those can be very effective. You can't just rely on the network protection, the endpoint protection. You have to actually get into the data and figure out what's really necessary in order to conduct business, what information can be redacted because it's no longer necessary, and how do you
Right.
proceed. But it's really a big part of complying with privacy laws and regulations.
Absolutely.
You
Thank you,
know, uh,
Elliot.
let's talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about that. So, getting back to the role of the CPO,
Mhm.
working with a company's risk management, compliance, working with external auditors, working with state and local
Yeah.
compliance uh, agencies. They really need to develop and implement a data privacy program that's designed to meet the requirements of the laws and regulations, but also is something that can be rolled out effectively in a corporation, whether it be centralized or decentralized. We're very familiar with banks, which can both be very centralized in their data processing, but very decentralized in, for example, their retail branch structure. And both require different approaches and different modalities to protect individuals' privacy. They need to provide training to employees on privacy
Mhm.
compliance. And that training really needs to emphasize the cultural shift that a
Yeah.
company has to go through, where they don't just own the customer data, they need to be custodians of that data, and the data still it's under the ownership of the customer. And finally, they have to respond quickly and effectively to any kind of data leakage, whether it be a breach, uh, unknown uh, access to customer data. It has to be done in a timely and effective manner. Last time I checked, the average cost per individual for a breach or even unintended access to customer data can run a couple $100 per customer. So when you talk
Mhm.
about, cases where a large hotel chain exposed almost 5 million members
Yeah.
uh, to outside view personal information, 5 million times 200 is a significant amount of money. Much better to put
Absolutely.
the tools to protect data in place, much more reasonable and much more cost effective.
Absolutely. As you touch upon culture of privacy, right? I want to understand more about how can a chief privacy officer help corporation to build a culture of privacy, within the organization.
Yeah, and this I think is the key. It's not
Yeah.
just a technology question, it really is a
Mhm.
cultural shift. And those can be very hard. As a friend of mine likes to say, if you're driving the super tanker and you turn the wheel all the way to the right, it doesn't
Mhm.
start turning for several miles. And that's the
Yeah.
case here. You can put all sorts of policies, statements, customer acknowledgement, employee acknowledgments in place. But that doesn't mean it's effective. So, really, you need to be uh, very keen on practical matters, such as raising awareness of privacy issues among employees. And one way to address that is to point out that employees are customers too. So,
Yeah.
it's not just those external folks who do business with you, it's also employees within the company. The same regard, the same care of their personal information has to take place. And that personal emphasis can make a big difference. And really develop and implementing realistic and pragmatic policies and procedures. So people are not afraid to say, I left my computer on and I believe somebody used my ID and password to get in. I unintentionally left my laptop in the trunk of my car and it got stolen.
Mm.
Uh, I just realized, based on um, forensic evidence, that I think our data has been exposed to the outside world. All these things need to be brought to attention as quickly as possible and effectively dealt with. But again, providing training to employees, how to comply with privacy laws and regulations, and how to act in a responsible way are critical success factors.
Great. Thank you. Data breaches are everywhere. Penalties are heavy on enterprises. So, how can a chief privacy officer help corporation to manage the risk associated with the data breaches?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question, an interesting
Yeah.
study as one starts looking at the different types of breaches, case
Mhm.
studies of breaches, case studies of hacks, case studies of exposures that are unintentional. You realize that there's thousands of ways that data breaches can occur. And so it's really up to the CPO to develop and implement a data breach response plan that's effective for use, it's forward thinking, and it's really fit for use. The only way a plan like that can work is if practice, audits, and conducting trials take place on a regular basis. And there's
Yeah.
real understanding that when this vulnerability occurs, there's effective ways of handling it. And then finally, always look to implement data loss prevention or DLP technologies,
Yeah.
which really look at unauthorized data disclosure, whether it be through unintended purposes, through some third party which doesn't guard the data properly, or just exposing information that doesn't need to be exposed.
Great. Thank you. I see organizations, mostly into large B2B enterprises, they started appointing chief privacy officer. But for us to understand more, so what are some of the benefits of having a dedicated chief privacy officer?
I think that the number one benefit is the cost benefit is really huge when you look at the cost of handling an unintentional
Yeah.
personal data exposure, which can, in addition to the fines and remedies for the customers, can cost millions of dollars. So,
Mm.
really, the benefit is using your CPO to help looking at ways to mitigate those kinds of losses, to make sure that compliance with privacy laws and regulations are being met in a timely way. Um, Observing customer behavior and understanding that guarding their personal data is a matter of trust between the company and the individual. And also understand that there are competitive forces in the marketplace, and one can
Mhm.
take the protection of private information as a competitive advantage. So there's a number of benefits of having a CPO rather than just looking at it as an expense.
Great. Let me flip the question. So, what are some of the risk of not having a CPO?
Well, there's a lot of risks. One is, in many cases, the privacy laws and regulations specifically mandate the establishment of a CPO, and there are
Mhm.
fines associated with not doing that. Losing the trust of the customer because of data leakage, or that data leakage was not handled properly, or the kinds of financial losses that can occur from a data breach.
Absolutely fantastic. Uh, we all know, right? I mean, as a data safeguarders, so we are building the future of data privacy and synthetic fraud prevention SaaS solutions. So my question is, what is the future of a chief privacy officer's role?
Well, I think the future is that it becomes much more of a line position rather than a staff position reporting to the
Okay.
CEO. There's incredible proactive work that needs to be done by the CPO in guarding, collecting, and how impersonal information is processed. I think the CPO is more likely to play even more of a critical role in the future because the privacy laws and regulations continue to evolve. We're seeing new laws popping up all over the world, and somebody in the
Yeah.
company has to be aware of them and figure out how it impacts each individual company. So I think the evolution is it really becomes a powerful part of the bank. It separates itself from audit and internal risk and management, becomes
Mhm.
part of a forward thinking, fit for use company and how they treat their personal information. A simple case study is a customer call center requires a lot of customer information to solve problems, rightfully so. But then once that problem is solved, what happens to that personal information in a call center? And in many cases, it's not handled properly. So
Yeah.
again, a CPO in the future will look at situations like that where customer service needs to occur, but also care and privacy of information also needs to occur.
Great. Thank you, William. So you are our Chief Privacy Officer and co-founder. So what are some of the qualities that make an effective Chief Privacy Officer?
I think number one, it requires some research, and that's
Mhm.
clear, strong understanding of both the privacy laws and regulations that exist, both from a legal point of view and responsibility, but also pragmatically, how can they be implemented in an effective way? You really need good experience in developing and implementing data privacy programs, which are against, in many cases, the very fabric of how a company works. So the person needs to have a strong will in order to get a lot of these programs in place and fight the good battle for the customer. There's really a huge communications and leadership skill that it's not just the working behind the scenes and establishing policies and procedures, but being out in front and demanding that a company take a responsible and proactive point of view when it comes to customer privacy. And then really build relationships with all the stakeholders at all levels of the organization, from call center managers, in the case we just talked about, to line managers who say, without this personal information, how do I do my job? To data centers that are archiving tons and tons of information and have never rationalized whether that personal information is really necessary, to future trends and future partnerships and global movement of data. So there's a huge set of relationships and stakeholders that become more and more involved in the role of the CPO.
Great. Great, Ilya. Thank you very much. I always appreciate your time, and it's always a pleasure to connect with you and pick up your brain. And audience, thank you very much for listening to us. So, if you are new to Data Safeguard, we are at the forefront of transforming the landscape of data privacy, compliance, and synthetic fraud prevention powered by AI. We are chasing 1 trillion TAM, total addressable market. If you want to hear more about us, if you want to understand more about data safeguard, please reach out to us. You can be a partner, you can be a potential investor as well as a customer. So thank you, Elliot, again, once again. And yeah, we will come back with a different topic sometime soon. Till then, take care and don't forget to safeguard your data, personal data. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
Elliot.
Dominic.